We are talking Vampire Virus, also known as After Dark. This one is directed by Charlie Steeds. Now, Charlie Steeds, a British-born director, seems to be making somewhat of a career of himself, making almost mockbusters of kind of yesteryear-style horror films. So his film catalogue seems to consist of films that seem to be influenced by certain film genres, or certain films specifically from mainly kind of the 80s, but basically pre kind of 2000 stuff. And this one is clearly influenced by the vampire films such as Fright Night, Vamp, Lost Boys, things like that. The story takes place in America, although it's played by British actors in the UK pretending to be Americans with mixed results. We have this kind of vampire virus gets into the local populace, and it focuses on this young woman who is seduced by a beautiful vampiric seductress and ultimately turned into a vampire, and then kind of perpetuating the analogy here with kind of sexually transmitted diseases. And then we have this converging storyline where there's a kind of the police investigation, and one of the kind of the police officers is dating the roommate of this particular girl, for example, and all the stories will converge at the end. It has a strong LGBT element in this one, and is certainly, as I say, very influenced by vampire films of the yesteryear. So what do we think? Okay. There are some stylistic choices here that I really did enjoy. I think there's a big effect here to have it, although it's not specifically set in the 80s. You have this kind of like the very kind of like the pinks and the blue lightings and stuff like that that will kind of give it this kind of like neon feel to it. That kind of gives it this kind of somewhat of an 80s vibe to it. Added to that, you have this 80s style synthy soundtrack, which I have to say, I really enjoyed the soundtrack here. Although it does almost seem to almost replicate certain songs directly from said 80s vampire films. There's one that sounds suspiciously similar to Brad Fiddel's music from Fright Night, for example. So that, but I still kind of liked it, I gotta be honest. I have to say, I actually kind of quite like the idea of these converging storylines. Obviously, it's not anything new, but I felt it did give the movie somewhat of its own identity, rather than being more or less a just a complete rip-off. So one thing I would say about Charlie Steeds' films is they tend to be influenced very much by these kind of like the 80s style, not just horror films, because he's done like a Mad Max one as well, but 80s style films, but then he puts his kind of own spin on it. So it's kind of like this, but then I'll kind of change it slightly. And that's kind of what I feel this movie has kind of been done. Obviously, you know, it has this kind of the metaphors with sexually transmitted diseases and all of this. So maybe it's trying to have a message. I don't know if that was just a happy accident, so to speak, but there you go. As I've said, this is a British film pretending to be an American film, and some actors do it okay, some do not. Some of the acting here is a little bit ropey. My favourite character was probably the two men, actually, the police officer and, you know, the guy who is the housemate. I thought they probably did the best American kind of accents, and kind of made me forget that they were actually kind of British actors here. But the rest of the cast, their accents come and go. Some put on way too much of a kind of a strong fake American accent, things like this. And just the kind of the cheapness of this movie will kind of permeate through here. One of the kind of the bugbears I have with low budget vampire films, and I try and say this in every sort of review that I do that kind of does this, is where we have cheap looking fangs for starters on our vampires, and how the vampires, when they speak with the fangs on, look so unnatural. Now, if you are a vampire and you have fangs, you are used to them being in your mouth, so you don't try to kind of enunciate around them and really try and show them every time you speak. And I always feel it's a trap that low budget vampire films kind of fall into, in the fact that they always feel like they have to kind of show off the fangs and stuff like that, but it really makes the actor struggle to kind of say lines when realistically they will just be part of their, you know, physiology really. They wouldn't really struggle with it. Just a little bugbear in one. I've got to kind of say it every time, to be honest with you, because pretty much all of these films do it. To be honest with you, this film was a little bit of a tough watch. I did feel the story kind of was quite weak. I felt there was very little characterization here. If you kind of, you know, if you compare it to the films I feel it's trying to emulate, you really see the difference between, you know, how these characters are kind of introduced. Now, you can take the budget away from it, because you can still get low budget films that you can have good characters, interesting characters that you kind of latch onto. And like I said, there are a couple of characters here that I felt like did a better job. Ultimately, our male characters, to be honest with you, I thought were better in this film. But they are actually not the main characters, to be quite honest. So this movie felt very shortchanged in kind of backstory and characterization. Everyone felt very shallow. I really wasn't kind of buying the characters that they were playing. For example, our main kind of girl, we were meant to believe that she's this kind of nebbish, stay-at-home, homely, you know, girl next door type. But, you know, outside of people just saying, oh, just trying to tell you that in exposition, we really don't get the impression of that at all. You know, our main seductress vampire, yeah, she's very pretty and everything, but she really struggles to kind of, as I say, talk with these things, these masks in, and it looks like one of those kind of porn parodies you get, the vampire kind of porn parodies that you would have seen. You know, the Misty Monday always used to do these sort of things. That's what it looks like. It looks like a vampire porn film, but without the kind of the porn side of things. I've got to say, the third act is a real mess. The final conflict is a bit of a joke. Is all I'm going to say. It tries to have some heart in it, but I feel it really fails in that respect. And there's some things that happen on the lead up to that were kind of poor. I watched The Barge People quite recently, and I actually quite enjoyed that to a point, from Charlie Steeds, and I liked kind of Cannibal Farm as well, but he has a real mixed bag, unfortunately. This one seems to be very rushed, and although I like some of the choices that were made in regard to some of the stylistic elements here, it just seems so cheap. I mean, just to kind of like, well, for example, let me just give you a couple of examples of how cheap this film is. Our opening scene, okay, is meant to be in Romania, but everyone speaks English, okay. The very first person that we see is this kind of this doctor that kind of is wearing a lab coat, which clearly has just come out of a packet because it's got all of the folds in it. It's never been worn before, never been ironed. They've literally just taken a lab coat out of a packet, put it on this actress, and just gone. But you can clearly see all the folds in it. She's got one button done up on it. It looks like the attention to detail here is virtually zero. We see, for example, a shot in a car. And, you know, this girl's getting in a taxi, and we see kind of like, it's meant to be, obviously they're not really outside, there's just mist going on, but the mist is just, there's no movement, it's just kind of like, you know, flirting around outside. At least they've got a fan to make it look like the mist was kind of going past, but it's just, you know, hanging around outside like there's no movement, because there isn't. The attention to detail here is quite poor. And there's stuff that could have been improved upon, which did not need to have a bigger budget. So I feel this movie was just a very, very quick shoot, and things just kind of that will do kind of attitude. And Charlie Steeds can do better, and I would say, although The Barge People wasn't a fantastic movie, they looked like more effort went into that one, whilst this one just seems to be knock it out over one weekend. To me, this was quite a poor film. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.